$50 billion every week, not every month, not every year. Every single week, the United States government borrows $50 billion. That is $7 billion a day. That is $290 million every single hour. Around the clock, 7 days a week, every week of the year. And it has been doing this for the past 5 months straight. This is not an estimate. This is not a projection. This is the official finding of the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan government agency whose only job is to count the money. Their report, released on March 10, 2026, is as clear as it gets. In just the first 5 months of fiscal year 2026, October 2025 through February 2026, the United States government added $1 trillion to the federal deficit. $1 trillion in 5 months. And in February alone, one single month, the government borrowed $308 billion. To put that in perspective, $308 billion is more than the entire annual GDP of countries like Portugal, New Zealand, and Hungary, borrowed. In 1 month, the total national debt is now approaching $38.9 trillion. And the head of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, one of the most respected nonpartisan fiscal watchdogs in America, said something in response to this report that every American needs to hear. 4 words: this cannot be sustainable. Not, this is a concern. Not, we should monitor this. This cannot be sustainable. Now here is the question that most financial news coverage completely fails to answer. Why should you care? You did not borrow this money. You did not sign anything. You did not vote on a single line item of the federal budget. So why does this number, $38.9 trillion, have anything to do with your life? Here is the answer. Because every dollar the government borrows, it eventually has to service. And right now, the United States Treasury is paying $433 billion in interest alone, just in the first 5 months of this fiscal year. $433 billion. Not on roads, not on schools, not on healthcare, not on anything you can see or use. Just on interest, on debt that already exists. Interest payments on the national debt are now projected to exceed $1 trillion this year. $1 trillion spent entirely on interest. That number, according to the same nonpartisan budget analysts, could climb above $2 trillion every single year by 2036. $2 trillion a year just in interest, just to service debt that already exists. And here is where it connects directly to your household. When the government spends $2 trillion a year on interest, that is $2 trillion not being spent on anything else. Not on reducing your taxes, not on improving infrastructure, not on keeping Social Security funded, not on Medicare, not on anything that comes back to you. The debt is not an abstract number on a government website. It is the slowly closing ceiling above every public service, every social program, every tax cut, and every financial commitment the government has made to ordinary Americans. Let me make this concrete. Let me show you exactly how the national debt is already affecting your daily financial life. Right now, whether you realize it or not. Impact 1. Your interest rates. When the government borrows massive amounts, it competes with everyone else who wants to borrow money. Banks, businesses, not home buyers. That competition pushes interest rates higher. Higher government borrowing is one of the structural reasons why mortgage rates have stayed elevated even after the Federal Reserve cut short-term rates. The government is in the market borrowing so aggressively, every single week, that it keeps upward pressure on the long-term rates that determine your mortgage payment, your car loan, your home equity line of credit. Every extra dollar you pay on a 30-year mortgage because rates are elevated is connected in part to the government borrowing $50 billion a week. Impact 2. Your Social Security. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2032, 6 years from now. When the trust fund runs out, Social Security does not disappear. But benefits get cut automatically to match what comes in from payroll taxes. That cut, according to current projections, would be approximately 23 to 28% of every benefit check. For someone receiving $2,000 a month, that is a cut of $400 to $560 every month for the rest of their retirement. With no congressional action required, it happens automatically. And here is the connection to the debt. The national debt is growing so fast, and interest payments consuming such a large share of federal revenue, that the government's ability to shore up Social Security before 2032 is severely constrained. The money that could fix Social Security is increasingly spoken for by interest payments on debt that already exists. Impact 3. Your taxes. The CBO projects total deficits averaging 7.2% of GDP over the next 30 years, with debt swelling from 100% of GDP today to 175% of GDP by 2056. A debt that reaches 175% of GDP cannot be sustained without either dramatic spending cuts or significant tax increases. or both. The CBO is not predicting which path Congress will take. But the math of 175% debt to GDP leaves very few options that do not involve ordinary Americans paying more or receiving less than they currently do. Impact 4. Inflation. When governments borrow heavily and the debt becomes large enough that markets begin to question whether it can be repaid, one of the tools available is simply printing more money. More money chasing the same goods and services means higher prices. This is not a new phenomenon. Every major inflation episode in modern history has had excessive government borrowing somewhere in its roots. The Federal Reserve's job is specifically to prevent this outcome, to keep inflation under control. But the Federal Reserve's tools become harder to use effectively when government borrowing is this large and this persistent. Impact 5. The programs you depend on. In the first 5 months of fiscal year 2026, government spending reached $3.1 trillion. The 3 largest entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, saw outlays rise by $104 billion. These are the programs that tens of millions of Americans depend on for their health care, their retirement income, and their basic financial survival. They are growing, the debt is growing, the interest payments are growing. At some point, these 3 growth curves cannot all continue simultaneously. Something has to give. And historically, in every country that has faced this math, what gives first is the programs that serve ordinary people. I want to be honest with you about something uncomfortable. There is no easy fix for this. There is no single policy, no single election, no single decision that resolves $38.9 trillion in national debt. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not being straight with you. The bipartisan experts, the ones who count the money regardless of which party is in power, are saying the same thing. Deficits are projected to average more than 6% of GDP every year for the next decade. By 2036, federal debt rises to 120% of GDP in even the optimistic scenario. In the long-term scenario, 175% of GDP by 2056. These are not partisan numbers, these are CBO numbers. The same office that serves both Republican and Democratic Congresses. Now, here is what this means for the practical decisions you are making about your money right now. Practical step 1. Do not count on Social Security as your only retirement income. If you are under 50, plan your retirement as if Social Security will be meaningfully smaller than current projections suggest. Not zero, but smaller. Contribute to your retirement accounts as aggressively as your budget allows. A 401k match from your employer is the closest thing to free money that exists in the American financial system. Take all of it, every dollar. Practical step 2. Understand that interest rates may stay elevated longer than expected. If you are planning to buy a home, or refinance, or take any significant loan, build your budget around current rates, not hoped-for future rates. The government's borrowing keeps structural upward pressure on long-term rates that is unlikely to resolve in the near term. Practical step 3. Build financial resilience at the household level. When government programs face pressure, and the math says they will, the households that survive best are the ones that built some financial independence before that pressure arrived. An emergency fund, reduced high-interest debt, diversified income where possible, a retirement account that does not depend entirely on government programs. These are not radical steps. They are the practical response to living in a country whose government is borrowing $50 billion a week, and whose fiscal experts are saying publicly that this cannot be sustained. Practical step 4. Pay attention to the debt ceiling. Later this year, Congress will need to raise the debt ceiling again to allow continued borrowing. These debates are often loud, occasionally dramatic, and always end with the ceiling being raised. But the debate itself, and any period where a resolution is delayed, can temporarily rattle financial markets and affect your investment accounts. Do not panic during debt ceiling debates, but do stay informed. Here is the final thing I want to leave you with. The Congressional Budget Office said something in this report that every American deserves to hear clearly and directly. Our fiscal problems will not solve themselves. 6 words from a nonpartisan agency whose only job is accuracy. Our fiscal problems will not solve themselves. They are not saying the sky is falling. They are not saying America is finished. They are saying, with the calm precision of people who count money for a living, that the current path is not sustainable, and that the people who will feel the consequences first, the people who always feel consequences first, are ordinary Americans who work hard, pay their taxes, and trust that the institutions built around them will hold. Real Cost America exists to make sure you have the clearest possible picture of what those institutions are actually doing, so you can make the best possible decisions for your household. Not with fear, with information. Subscribe. Because next week, we are going to show you exactly what happens to middle-class savings when governments borrow beyond their means, and what history says the smartest ordinary people did to protect themselves.